Persona 5 The Phantom X is a mess. Look, I'd like to think that I'm someone who enjoys the Persona series. I wouldn't have purchased Persona 5 Royal, Tactica, or Persona 3 Reloaded before ever beating Kamoshida in the original release if I didn't already have full confidence in my love for the franchise. But I'm also someone that enjoys gacha games. And look, I get it. Saying I enjoy gacha games is kind of a hot take, considering how money hungry these games can be. But I actually find gacha games, well, more specifically Zenless Zone Zero and Strenova, to be pretty fun. As even though you could spend money trying to get a new character, for these games specifically, you really don't have to, as the amount of skill it takes to play these games isn't based on how leveled up your unit is or what your unit's kit brings to the table, but instead on your performance as a player. But being a fan of both the Persona series and gacha games, you bet I was excited when I heard that Persona 5 The Phantom X was finally getting a Western release. And so after playing it for a few hours, it's a mess. Look, I'm someone that will always try to sing the praises of whatever game I talk about. Even if the game isn't exactly the best, I'll always try to make an effort to say at least one positive thing. But when it comes to P5X, this game does not make it easy. And this is because at times, the Phantom X rides a line between being actively predatory in its monetization and being just the absolute best at making my brain go numb. Okay, I know that sounds kind of dramatic, and maybe I'm being a bit too harsh here. So you know what, let's go over pretty much the entirety of the Phantom X, that way you can understand just why I think this game as a whole just really isn't all that great. Starting with... Now, Persona 5 The Phantom X is a game that feels like it's a gacha game first and a Persona game second. What I mean by this is that the game pulls heavily from other gacha games like Honkai Star Rail and Zenless Zone Zero, in the sense that you as a player have multiple things you could be doing at any given time, whether that be progressing through the story, grinding materials, strengthening your social links, synergy with other characters, playing limited time events, or pulling for characters via the gacha system. Now, in all fairness, these things are mainstays of the gacha genre. So much so that pretty much every gacha game that Hoyoverse has ever released has these mechanics in them from the very beginning. But the Phantom X throws so much of this in your face to the point where it feels like the game itself is practically begging you to engage with the game's content. Like here, take this clip for example. In this clip, I'm only 39 minutes into the game, and what's the first thing I see after being given freedom to do whatever I want? Oh yeah, a screen showing me that I can get exclusive items for logging in 3 days in a row. And then immediately afterwards, the very first thing I unlock is the game's shop, followed by the limited time events tab and gacha. Now at first I thought the shop was used for purchasing new equipment like weapons, medicines, and clothing. You know, stuff that in a normal Persona game would be neat to have in one convenient spot, so you're not traveling back and forth on the map in order to go from the weapon shop to the clothing store. But nope, it's the game's actual shop, where you can purchase with real money materials that you can use on pulls for the gacha. Now again, in all fairness, every gacha game has this, but I think this might be the first time where I've seen a gacha game hand its players the ability to buy stuff right at the very beginning, as most gacha games tend to hand that stuff to the player at least an hour or two into the game after the general tutorial has been finished. You know, after the player has spent enough time in the game to actually get invested into it. I know it sounds like I'm doing nothing but complaining so far, and trust me, it's gonna get worse, but as someone who has played through and spent countless hours in multiple different gacha games, Persona 5 The Phantom X feels like it's a gacha game that is solely riding off the dwindling hype created by Persona 5. And believe me, it's been dwindling for a while. But that's basically all I had to nag about for the general stuff, so let's get into what I really have an issue with, the... Okay, so I've already complained about the monetization already, so I'll try and make this quick. But in what world do you play a gacha game and get flashbang with these screens telling you that there's a discount in the shop? Not even Zenless is as predatory in its monetization, and that game feels like it's constantly sexualizing its characters just to bring people in to spend money. And again, I know it sounds like I'm being dramatic here, but look, in this clip, the game wanted to throw its grubby little hands in my face so badly that the game had to fight against itself twice just to flash me with the, hey look, a discount for a unit you have screen. And this is all without mentioning that there are two UI elements on screen whenever you're playing the game normally that link directly back to the shop. But these things combined with the stuff I nagged about in the previous segment is exactly what I mean when I say that this game feels like a gacha game first and a persona game second, because the game actively tries to pull as much money as it can from the player at seemingly all times, which at that point doesn't even feel like a gacha game and more like a loan shark. And look, I get it, the Phantom X is a free-to-play gacha game, so having predatory monetization practices should be kind of expected. But as someone who's been playing Hoyo vs. Gacha games since Genshin released on the PS4, the way the Phantom X goes about with trying to pull money out of its players just feels really predatory. But alright, I'll shut up about the monetization and finally start talking about the actual game. Starting with the... Now, when it comes to the characters of the Phantom X, they're kind of just bland? I don't know, I'm sorry, I wish there was another word I could use to describe these characters, but they all honestly feel like oversimplified Persona 5 characters. With the player character being so obviously Joker just with the way lamer backstory, Lufel being Morgana minus the traits and personality that actually made Morgana integral to the story, and Motaha being pretty much on if on played baseball. Like, it feels like these characters are such beat for beat copies of the Persona 5 cast, to the point where Motaha has the same awakening that On did in Persona 5, even down to the extent of being tied to a cross while her life is being threatened by the First Palace's ruler. And you know what, since I mentioned them, let's talk about that. So at this point, you're probably wondering who the first big bad guy you fight is, and while you're probably expecting a villain that uses his status to manipulate and abuse others, you need to seriously lower your expectations. Because the First Palace ruler is Takayuki Kiyuchi, a washed-up baseball player that retired after being basically outdone by Motaha when she was just a kid. And while you're probably thinking that he maybe uses his celebrity status to hurt others, again, you need to seriously lower your expectations. Because Kiyuchi's whole thing is that he likes to go through subway stations and slam into women. But apparently Kiyuchi's such a menace that he's earned the title of the Subway Slammer, which, real quick, can I just say how goofy of a name that is? Like, I get it, shoving is probably an issue in real life, but I can't take a villain seriously when his name is literally the Subway Slammer. But yep, that's the First Palace ruler you have to face in the Phantom X. A guy who just likes shoving women because a little girl beat him in baseball. Now at this point, I'd say it's about time I start talking about the story, but I pretty much just went over it. So instead, let's talk about... Now, in all honesty, the only change I would really make to the story and its characters is to change the backstory of the player character, Nagisa. Because in a lot of gacha games, especially ones that have a story that pans out over the course of multiple patches, the game usually introduces the game's overarching big bad at the very start, allowing the player to get some level of interest towards the story while progressing throughout the game. But in the Phantom X, that just doesn't happen. As far as I've played, the Phantom X doesn't have a big bad that the game is actively working towards, which is just weird considering that Persona 5, the game that the Phantom X pulls a lot of its aspects from, introduces its main big bad, Shido, in the early hours of the game, which just makes the Phantom X feel kind of awkward, as it feels like the characters are sort of just meandering around until something happens. But that's pretty much the only thing I would change in the story as a whole, because while I would like to change the backstory and overall story of the game, I'm not an expert writer. I'm just a goofy VTuber on the internet with an English degree. But that's basically everything I wanted to say when it comes to the story and characters. So let's get into the... Alright, so I'm gonna be honest here, there really isn't much to talk about for the gameplay. It's quite literally just Persona 5, with the only major difference being that there isn't a calendar system, which consequently means that there also really isn't a time limit as to when you need to beat a palace, meaning you technically have all the time in the world to beat a palace, just so long as the story of the game says so. But aside from that, the Phantom X takes the exact same approach that all gacha games do in order to limit how much the player can do during any given day, and that is by making certain actions like grinding be tied to an energy system that refills daily, which is basically only there to ensure that the player comes back almost daily to do their dailies and progress through the game. And while I would like to cap off this segment by talking about how the social links and points are handled in the Phantom X, I really didn't see a difference in how they're handled in this game when comparing them to Persona 5. But for my final segment on the Phantom X, I want to bring in my... So before writing the video, I went ahead and asked a few of my friends to give me their honest thoughts on the Phantom X. So without further ado, let's read out a few of these. I have not played it because it will do unspeakable things to my bank account. It's fun because I finally get to play a peak Sona game. Generally, the core game of P5X is good. It's the good old gameplay of modern Persona games we've come to know and love for these past years. Although the new leveling system for both party members via the Revelation card system and Personas via leveling up their skills is a bit weird. Though that's purely because P5X is a gacha game. Speaking of gacha games, the gacha system for P5X is not good. Nowadays, gacha games either have some form of guaranteed banner or decrease the amount of pulls it takes to get the guarantee after losing the 50-50, and P5X has none of that. Although I will give them credit that the pity and cost per pull is lower than most gacha games out there like Honkai Star Rail, another turn-based gacha game comparable to P5X. On top of that, P5X is a pretty generous game for a gacha title, unless you're a global player. Now, as of right now, it's kinda hard to tell how good the main story, side stories, characters, and world building of P5X is, because P5X is still relatively a new game, and that takes time to develop, especially in a gacha game. So, as of right now, besides the stuff the game has been doing against their global players as of 1.1, I would recommend giving P5X a try, especially if you're a Persona fan. Alright, so now that I've read through a few, I think it's time I let my friends Derp Knight and Brick give their thoughts on the game, so take it away, guys.
P5X is one of the most mixed experiences I've ever had playing a video game, where it sort of feels like every amazing strength of the game has a terrible flaw attached to it, especially coming from someone who's played all three modern Persona games. Let's take the game's visual presentation as an example. This game looks incredibly pretty, and the animation quality is some of the best in the whole series. The textures are really good, and the models are also a step up from even Reload, the most modern game in the franchise. However, the game will occasionally pause or bug out. For example, I encountered missing textures, bugged out backgrounds, and situations where only the character's head is showing. Some say this is due to my PC specs, but I've seen this to be a consistent issue from seeing others' perspectives. And some more common issues are the pause before each battle and the inconsistent lighting quality. This game feels very polished in some areas and incredibly underbaked in others. And while you could make the argument that they'll fix it later, from what I've seen from the Korean version of the game, which is a year ahead of global, a lot of these issues still remain prevalent, which doesn't give me much hope. Other parts of the game are a similar story. Dungeons, or known as palaces in the game, have some incredibly fun gimmicks and layouts, but they amount to repeatedly pushing a box or pulling a switch to open a door, which gets very repetitive, especially considering their length. Not to mention there are EXP caps which halt your progress, where your choices for grinding EXP are few and far between. The character variety in different ways that you can build your team is amazing and leads to some very good strategies, as the meta is in a great spot, far more than the original Persona 5. But this is locked behind gacha mechanics, which means that the most fun compositions are only accessible for those who either spend a lot of money or grind for hours on end. I have so many more good things to say about P5X, but equally so many more issues, to the point where I'd just be rambling on and on. I wouldn't recommend this being your first exposure to the Persona series, especially since this game ditches the calendar system that the series is known for, and instead uses action points. However, if you're willing to put up with the gacha mechanics and the drawbacks that I mentioned, then this game has some incredible gameplay and an even better soundtrack. I don't know if Pokaie has been including some of the songs in this video, but if you all should know anything about Persona, it's that the soundtracks never miss. Overall, the game leaves me with some incredibly mixed opinions, but if you like Persona or like gacha games, then the game is free, so you might as well give it a shot. Many thanks to Pokaie for inviting me on, and despite all that I've said, I'm gonna go do my dailies.
Hello, my name is Brick. Today I want to talk about how KR is completely different from global, current TW. The difference between global and how poorly they've handled it, KR handles it completely differently. The reason for that is because it's actually not managed by Sega like global is, and is instead managed by, I'm pretty sure, Blackwing Studio. Because of that, and they're not managed by Sega, the global and KRTWCN are all doing its own thing. Right now in KRTW, they have this really big catch-up event where you're able to pick most of the Velvet units from, I think, up to the summer update, which is Summer Motoha, Summer Tomoko, and a couple other people. Because of that, they give out free things often. Whenever I made my TW account, and I got 10 pulls on the standard banner, and I got 20 pulls on the limited banner. On top of dailies, instead of being 2,250 XP, I think in TW it's 9,760 because of the catch-up event. And they also have a bunch of XP related things. So just for logging in for 14 days, you get 1.9 million XP for just logging in every day, and just a bunch of really important upgrade tools and stuff. You also get 2 or 3 5 stars, and you can just pick Like you can pick the 5-star you wanted out of like the limited pool they have. And part of the limited pool they gave you, there's a unit called Cord, and Cord is the best support character in the entire game, and you can get her without even starting the first palace yet. Compare that to Global. Global is also 1 year behind. It's handled completely differently. Rewards aren't as easy to get compared to KR and TW. In that game, you're able to basically just log on, get 2 million XP, go from level 3 at that time to level 30 without doing anything. And in Global, since they're handled by Sega obviously has a bigger say in what they want, and because of that, don't expect Global to change unless Sega really listens. Beside that, KR and TW are really good, and honestly the language barrier, as long as you have the translator mod, which is really easy to get, isn't that bad, and you get so much more content. And for KR and TW, since the rewards are very generous, you're able to get into the game and catch up with players who have been playing for a long time a lot easier. Global, maybe if they rerun same events, it'll be better in the future. But with the way things are heading right now, with stuff like Guaranteed Banner not being out, Marion not going to the standard banner, among plenty of other things, it's hard to believe if they'll change. Another thing I want to talk about, because Global doesn't really know yet, is the story for P5X, especially in KR TWCN. Fun fact, so the person who wrote Palace 1 and Palace 2 for the Subway Slammer and I forgot the Palace 2 boss, that guy got fired, and then with Global releasing, the director of P5X actually ranted on Twitter and called him a palace ruler, and I think it was really funny. And because of that, Sega's been overseeing the story since Palace 3. On top of that, I think that the story will get a lot better in terms of from Palace 3 onwards, as it has with KR and TW. And also another thing is, while yes, KR TW like seem really scary and aren't as like, I guess, easy to get as Global is, you're still able to do everything like for free without having to jump through a lot of hoops and hurdles. It's just as easy as downloading it and then downloading the launcher from the KR website, which honestly isn't even that hard to go through, and then just logging in with Google, and then that's it.
But there you go. And now that we got my friends' opinions out of the way, let's move on to... So as a whole, Persona 5 The Phantom X is a messy game, and while I can understand why some people might enjoy it, since it offers something for Persona fans to do while waiting for Persona 4 Revival to release, I, in all fairness, cannot recommend you check out this game if you're new to the Persona franchise or just new to gacha games in general, because I don't want people that are new to Persona games to waste their time when they could be playing actual Persona 5, and I don't want people that are new to gacha games to fall victim to the game's highly predatory practices. But hey, if you're someone that enjoys the Phantom X despite everything I've said during this video, then honestly that's good for you. Obviously throughout this video I've just been giving my opinion on the game as someone whose background stems from both the Persona franchise and gacha games. Now, no one should take my word as gospel. I'm just a VTuber after all that likes to talk about games. So if you're someone that enjoys the game, then more power to you. This game just isn't for me. Like I said at the start though, I'm not someone who likes to actively bash games. So for my next video, I promise it'll be one where I talk about whatever game I'm covering in a more positive light. Regardless though, I hope you enjoyed the video and that you share your thoughts on the Phantom X down in the comments. And while you're down there, why not drop a sub? But alright, I'll see you later. Bye!